In so many of the modern spiritual teachings, they tell us to follow our bliss, to engage in our highest passion. And that formula is all well and good if you happen to be a Mozart or a Picasso, who from a very early age was very clear on exactly where their passion lay, and so found it easy to walk that path. But I think for many of us, it's not so clear. It's more of a grey area. I think it begins early in life, when we're children in a family who perhaps has parents who don't have time to give us a full and wide childhood, full of experiences that allow us to discover where our passions and our skills lie. So perhaps we're left to fend for ourselves in terms of raising ourselves. And that doesn't really help us discover who we are and where those passions and skills lie. And from our formative early years, we're then introduced to a school environment. And the very word school suggests that there's an entraining going on to make everyone uniform, just like the school uniform that we were required to wear. We all wore the same clothes, we all went to the same lessons, we were all taught the same things, and we were all forced to conform, to be exactly like one another in our behaviour as well as our look. And that doesn't really help the individual being discover who and what they are, where those passions and skills lay. In fact, it does exactly the opposite. It destroys critical, creative thinking. It teaches us how to memorize information and then later on regurgitate it onto an exam paper. There's no problem solving, there's no creativity, there's very little discussion and group work and interaction. There's very little practical work. And so year by year by year, our brains are forming along these very narrow, rigid lines that do not reflect our individuality, our creativity, our passions, and our skills. And so it is very much like a factory churning out a product. We're processed in a mechanical-like way and then spat out the other end into the work market. Some of us perhaps go to college, but when you don't know who you are, you don't know anything about yourself, you don't know where your passions and strengths lie, college becomes an extension of school. You are thrown out there, forced to choose from many, many different courses, and it's almost a random choice. You could choose something that is fun and easy, or something that is more likely to lead to a job. And so, for many of us, myself included, we came out of the education system without a clue of who we were and where our strengths and passions lay. And the economic pressures of life forced us to get a job, pretty much applying for anything and everything that was going to get an income, to start paying our way. We couldn't sponge off our parents forever. They had bills, they had expenses. We had to earn money just like our parents did, or our parent. And so we don't have time to discover ourselves, to discover who we are, to discover our passions and joys and our bliss. We get up with the alarm clock, go to work, come home exhausted, make something to eat, put our clothes in the washing machine, maybe watch a TV show, fall asleep, and then do the same again, day in, day out. And all the time, the modern spiritual teachers are telling us to follow our bliss, to engage in our highest passion. And we go through this repetitive motion, day in, day out, until something happens, something breaks that pattern. Often tensions slowly build up over time, and it forces a crisis, which in hindsight many people see as a violent recalibration. It causes a change that we didn't have the courage to make, which actually leads to a better outcome. It's a readjustment that often needs to be made, whether it's a relationship situation, a job situation, a health situation. Crises rip us out of our day-to-day routine, our repetition, and throw us into a new space and force us to confront what we didn't have the courage or the wherewithal to confront on our own. Left to our own devices, we would have just gone on repeating and repeating and repeating the pattern forever, until it was time to retire or die, I suppose. And so, where does that leave us? That leaves us spiritually crippled as adults. And we go through a process of trying to heal, and we follow the spiritual teachings and the psychological teachings and the teachings about healing from trauma. And we're searching for our bliss, we're searching for our passion. And what that means is we're searching for ourselves. You only know what your bliss or your passion is when you know who you are as an individual. So you have to embark on a journey, an inner journey, to discover who you are later on in life, when you haven't been taught how to do this. So it's like you're treading water in the middle of an ocean. You don't have the tools to navigate. You have to figure it all out yourself. You have to figure out how to swim, how to navigate. You have to discover which direction you should be swimming in. And you have to begin to make progress. And in the real world, the way this looks is often experimenting, doing all the things that you should have done as a child, as an adult. That means trying different things out, so that through a process of trial and error, you can slowly begin to zero in on what works and what doesn't work, what flows and what creates resistance. I doubt I'm alone in being an adult in later life who is going through a process of experimentation in an effort to discover who and what they are. In my case, a crisis did arise. It was a health crisis in my case. I had a job. I thought I was quite happy in that job. I don't think I was truly. I had a small flat in London. I had a long commute to work, a long work day, and a long commute back. But it was in a field that I was comfortable with. It was creative. It was in the design industry. And I had worked hard to get that position in a very competitive field. And so I grabbed hold of that position with both hands. And when my boss was fired, I was promoted to his position. And so that made me grip hold of that position even tighter. And I would never have given it up, except for the fact that I had a health crisis, and it forced me to give that job up. It forced me to go on sick leave, and After a few weeks of that, I was let go from the job because it didn't look like I was going to be able to come back. That began a very painful recalibration of my life. It was, for me, it felt humiliating because I had to give up my independence, my home, and for several years I had to move back in with my parents and feel like a child again, feel helpless, feel wounded, feel dependent, and all the things I didn't want to be feeling at that stage of my life. I wanted to be successful. I wanted to have prosperity, happiness, all the things we all want. But I was forced back inside myself to think, and it began a new journey. It put me on a different pathway, a completely different pathway. Suddenly I had time. I had all the time in the world to think and to try things out. I began to, as I mentioned before, experiment, do the things that a healthy childhood should involve. Being introduced to nature, being introduced to art, literature, science, travel, being introduced to all of the different fields of human endeavour, so that we can taste from all the different dishes and find the one that suits us. And I'm still doing that now, but at this point in my life, having spent a number of years experimenting and going through this process of trial and error, I'm finally beginning to zero in on who and what I am, where my passions lie. Unfortunately, it's much later in life, but it is what it is. I'm finally getting somewhere. It might be a journey that never ends, where you continue to zero in closer and closer on your true, authentic path and identity. But I think you get signs, indications that when you're on the right path. Enjoyment, of course, is one big one, and time slipping by without you realizing it is another. I've been experiencing those two big signposts recently. It's a very uplifting, encouraging feeling. For me, those things happen to be writing a fantasy/drama novel that involves many of my own experiences and thoughts and observations and ideas and principles that I've accumulated and constructed over all the years of my life, so that it's not just an entertaining story, but an enriching story, full of insight and lessons, full of useful tools to help you discover yourself, to help you remain sane in a sometimes insane world. And another one is this new endeavour, pinning a little microphone onto myself and just walking around and talking about whatever happens to come into my mind, because I'm cultivating the process of flow, of connecting with something higher and seeing if I can draw upon that inspiration, wherever that comes from. And I think by repetition you hone skills, and it's not a case of repeating the same thing over and over again, because it's always evolving, it's always changing, it's a winding path that never stops taking you to new landscapes. It's not like a factory job where you're screwing lids on bottles and it's exactly the same every day. And so it's a journey of self-discovery, and perhaps it's a necessary recalibration. But I think the important thing is to experiment, to try different things out, to push ourselves beyond our comfort zone and see where that leads us, to be uncomfortable, to be frightened. And then we have some hope of discovering who we are, discovering our passions and skills in life. And then we can indeed take the advice that the modern spiritual teachers give us to follow our bliss, to engage in our highest passion. And then I think we're on the path to liberation, finally. The beginning of that path. And personally, I feel that's where I am. The beginning of that path. I do feel centered, and things are starting to flow. There's less anxiety. I'm distancing myself from all the things that cause me stress and unhappiness. It's difficult. I've always been a people pleaser, a diplomat. From an early age, I experienced bullying at home and at school. At home from an older brother. Every time I said something or did something, it would be turned and used as a weapon against me. And there would be ridicule and physical and verbal kind of abuse. And what that did was that made me retreat inside my shell like a turtle. I tried to ensure I said or did nothing that stood out. So I went deeper and deeper inside myself until I became deeply introverted and deeply shy, deeply repressed, very, very quiet. I would try to blend in with the shadows and not be noticed. And that makes it hard to go out into the world and express yourself freely, to discover yourself, to feel like you can go anywhere and do anything and be anyone. It makes it hard to find happiness and stable life situations and relationships. And I think I attracted to myself difficult situations, a health crisis, problematic relationships, trouble communicating and expressing myself. And it's only recently that I've found the strength, the independence, the will to do some deep self-analysis and look at myself and realize that there's a person there who needs pleasing too, who needs respecting too, who needs looking after too. It's not just everyone else around me who needs caring for and ensuring their happiness. I need to do that for myself. And it made it quite clear that there were habits that I was engaging in which were unhealthy, that there were relationships I was engaging in that were unhealthy. And so that clarity, that insight, gave me the opportunity to finally do something about it and to become my own parent, to become a parent to the wounded child that I am, and I think many of us are. We have to become our own parent and our own teacher. We have to acquire all the skills necessary to raise that wounded child, to raise that traumatized child and help them go through the process of healing and recovery and learning and self-discovery and unprogramming all of the bullshit which the school system implanted in us. I see it as damaging the mind and the emotions of the children. Actual harm. It's imprisoning the mind and the emotions and the individuality. And when that happens to a child, year after year, it becomes so deeply ingrained, it becomes a core part of their personality. Unpicking that mental, emotional damage that was instilled when we were so malleable, so sponge-like, is quite a challenge. But it's not beyond any of us. We just need to be patient and gentle and creative. And if we can create some space and some time to do that inner work, I think that's the beginning of finding ourselves, finding our peace, finding our liberation, finding our prosperity, whatever form that takes, finding our happiness, and doing all the things the modern spiritual teachers suggest that we do. And so that's the journey I'm walking. And I'm sharing this journey because I think there are other people, many, many other people, who are going through a similar process. They might not have articulated it in their own minds. It might be happening at a subconscious level, just an unhappiness, a restlessness, and they don't quite know why or what the problem is. But it's gradually becoming clear. And when they hear people sharing their stories like I am now, it begins to click into place. They begin to resonate with these words and experiences, so it opens up the door for them to begin walking a pathway that's all about coming to know themselves as individuals, as good, decent people who are worthy of love and respect. And that must start with you giving yourself love and respect, separating yourself from habits and people and situations which are harmful, and cultivating new habits, new situations, new relationships which are uplifting and enriching, so that you're reinventing yourself step by step by step. Again, you're becoming the parent that you didn't have. You're becoming the teacher that you didn't have. You're no longer looking outward for salvation. You are your own salvation. You stop being dependent and you start being independent. And I think that's where liberation lies. I hope what I've said resonates with some people. I don't know if anyone will ever hear these podcasts, but even if they don't, it doesn't really matter because I'm benefiting from the process of expressing them. But if anyone does encounter them, I hope it will help them, will encourage them to go on their own inner journey. And I'll continue to document my experiences and share stories. And perhaps we can keep each other company on this path. Okay, I think I've rambled on long enough. Thank you for listening, and I'll speak to you again soon.